is past midnight somewhere in the Persian Gulf. The water is black and flat. On the bridge of an oil tanker, a radar screen casts its pale green glow across the officer's face. The ship moves slowly, heavy with crude, somewhere between Kuwait and the Strait of Hormuz. Then the radar beeps twice. A contact, moving fast. Too fast for a merchant vessel. The officer reaches for the radio. He does not finish his sentence. The Exocet missile strikes the hull below the waterline. The explosion tears upward through steel decking. Burning fuel floods the lower passageways. Crew members fight toward the lifeboats in darkness and smoke. Some do not make it. This was not an isolated incident. During the 1980s, hundreds of commercial ships were attacked in these waters. Tanker captains began calling the Gulf a shooting range. Insurers called it catastrophic. Governments called it a crisis. How did a grinding land war between Iran and Iraq reach into the world's most vital oil corridor and turn it into a battlefield? The answer begins not on the water, but in the desert. In September 1980, Iraqi forces under Saddam Hussein crossed the border into Iran. The invasion was calculated to exploit the chaos of the Iranian Revolution and seize territory in the oil-rich southwest. It did not go as planned. Iran absorbed the blow, regrouped, and counterattacked with ferocious determination. By 1982, the front lines had barely moved. The war had become a grim stalemate of trenches, artillery, and human wave assaults that recalled the worst of the First World War. Neither side could deliver a decisive blow on land. Both nations depended on oil exports to fund the war. Iraq sent its oil overland and through pipelines. Iran sent oil by ship, tankers loaded at terminals in the Gulf, bound for buyers across the world. That dependence on sea routes made Iran vulnerable. Iraq recognized the opportunity. Because Iraq could not defeat Iran on the battlefield, it decided to strangle its economy at sea. Beginning in 1984, Iraqi aircraft began attacking Iranian oil facilities and tankers in the Gulf. Tehran responded in kind, targeting ships carrying cargo to and from Iraq's regional allies, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. The tanker war had begun. The attacks spread quickly. Iraqi superintended jets, on loan from France, fired Exocet anti-ship missiles from distances the target ships never saw coming. The missiles skimmed low over the water, following radar returns to their mark. Ships with no military escort and no warning had almost no chance. Iran's response was different in method, but equal in lethality. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps deployed speedboats armed with rocket-propelled grenades and heavy machine guns. They raked passing vessels with fire. They boarded ships they deemed suspicious. And they seeded the shallow waters of the northern Gulf with naval mines, cheap, drifting, indiscriminate. The mines were perhaps the most frightening weapon of all. A mine does not discriminate. It does not distinguish a Liberian-flagged bulk carrier from a warship. It simply waits. Crews who had sailed these waters for decades now watched the bow wave ahead of them with a new and particular dread. Between 1984 and 1988, more than 400 ships were attacked in the Persian Gulf. Sailors from dozens of countries were killed or wounded. The smell of burning crude became familiar to anyone within sight of the Gulf's shipping lanes. Freight insurance rates for vessels transiting the Gulf quadrupled. Some companies refused to send ships at all, but the Gulf was too important to abandon. Roughly one-fifth of the world's oil supply passed through the Strait of Hormuz. The United States, Europe, and Japan depended on those shipments. The economic consequences of a total shutdown were unthinkable. Washington began to watch the deteriorating situation with growing alarm. Kuwait provided the pretext for American intervention. In late 1986, Kuwait approached both the United States and the Soviet Union with a request: reflag Kuwaiti tankers under foreign protection to deter Iranian attacks. The Soviets agreed to protect several vessels. Washington, alarmed by Soviet influence in the Gulf, moved decisively. In 1987, the Reagan administration launched Operation Earnest, the largest naval convoy escort mission since the Second World War. 11 Kuwaiti tankers were reflagged under the Stars and Stripes. American warships would escort them through the Gulf. The logic was blunt. Attack a Kuwaiti tanker now, and you attack an American flag. But the operation began badly. On the very first convoy, the reflagged tanker bridged and struck an Iranian mine. The massive ship survived, Its thick hull absorbed the blast. But the irony was humiliating. The American warships escorting Bridgeton sat higher in the water with thinner hulls. They had to fall in behind the tanker they were supposed to protect, using it as a minesweeper. Meanwhile, the United States and Iran edged toward open conflict. An Iranian mine-laying vessel was caught in the act in September 1987. American helicopters attacked it. Sailors were captured. In October, the U.S. Navy destroyed Iranian oil platforms used as military staging points in retaliation for a missile strike on an American-flagged tanker. The two countries were not at war, but they were no longer at peace either. The situation could not hold. One more incident would bring the confrontation to a head. On the 14th of April 1988, the USS Samuel B. Roberts struck an Iranian mine in the Central Gulf. The explosion was catastrophic. The frigate's keel cracked. 10 sailors were seriously wounded. The ship took on water and nearly sank. Only extraordinary damage control by the crew kept her afloat. They formed human chains, passed pumps hand to hand, and fought through the night to save the vessel. The Roberts survived. The American response would be swift and overwhelming. 4 days later, on April 18th, the United States Navy executed Operation Praying Mantis, its largest surface engagement since the Second World War. The plan was precise: destroy 2 Iranian oil platforms, then neutralize Iranian naval forces in the area. American warships approached the Sasan and Siri oil platforms at dawn. The crews were warned to evacuate. They refused. The Navy opened fire. Both platforms were destroyed. Iran responded. Revolutionary Guard speedboats moved to attack. Iranian frigates Sahand and Sablan sorted into the Gulf to engage American forces. What followed was a one-sided and violent lesson in naval power. The frigate Sahand fired missiles at American aircraft. The Americans replied with Harpoon anti-ship missiles and cluster bombs delivered by A-6 intruders. Sahand was struck repeatedly. Fires broke out across her decks. Secondary explosions tore through the hull. She sank. Sablan launched a torpedo at an American ship. The torpedo missed. American aircraft responded with a laser-guided bomb that struck her engine room. She was left dead in the water, burning and listing. Washington chose not to finish her off. By the end of the day, Iran had lost half its operational navy. 1 American sailor died, not in combat, but in a helicopter accident. The disparity in outcomes left little room for misinterpretation. Praying Mantis was the decisive moment. It demonstrated, beyond any doubt, that Iran could not survive a sustained naval confrontation with the United States. The Islamic Republic absorbed the blow in silence. It did not retaliate. 3 months after Praying Mantis, Iran accepted United Nations Security Council Resolution 598, calling for a ceasefire in the Iran-Iraq War. 8 years of fighting, more than 500,000 dead, and no territory meaningfully changed. The war ended approximately where it had begun. The naval campaign in the Gulf did not end the war alone, but it made continuing the war untenable. Iran's economy, already strangled by falling oil revenue and the cost of total mobilization, could not absorb further pressure. The destruction of its naval capacity removed one of its few remaining asymmetric advantages. Ayatollah Khomeini, who had once vowed to fight to the last breath, later compared accepting the ceasefire to drinking poison. The tanker war left a lasting mark on how great powers think about the Persian Gulf. It established an American precedent. The United States would use military force to keep the Strait of Hormuz open. That commitment did not fade when the shooting stopped. American naval presence in the Gulf became permanent, a posture that shaped every subsequent crisis in the region, from the Gulf War of 1991 to the confrontations with Iran in the decades that followed. There is something else worth remembering. Most of the people who fought this war at sea were not soldiers. They were merchant sailors, Filipinos, Indians, Greeks, Pakistanis, men who signed contracts to move cargo and found themselves navigating a war zone. They were not combatants by choice. Many of them were given no warning and offered no protection. They simply appeared on a radar screen and became a target. The Persian Gulf today is one of the most heavily monitored stretches of water on Earth. Warships, surveillance drones, and intelligence assets track every vessel through those narrow straits. The tanker war is a significant reason why. The world learned, through burning hulls and drifting mines, that the flow of oil is not merely an economic concern. It is a matter governments will go to war to protect. The dark water of the Gulf has long since closed over the wreckage. The fires are out, but the strategic logic that ignited them remains very much alive.